Just days before the last presidential election, The Atlantic published a piece written by Barton Gellman, who predicted with uncanny prescience that Donald Trump would attempt to subvert the results and overturn American democracy. He even laid out the plot pushed by Trump and his allies to convince Vice President Mike Pence that he had the unilateral power to announce his own reelection and a second term for Trump on January 6th. Now, at the time, Gellman's warning was not the consensus view. But now, as we approach what may be a repeat of 2020, there's a growing agreement and acute concern, I think, across the political spectrum about the explicitly authoritarian threat of a second Trump term. Former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney believes that Trump will never leave office if he is elected president again. The New York Times just published this headline explaining, quote, why a second Trump presidency may be more radical than his first. And the threat of another Trump term is the focus of a special issue of The Atlantic devoted to the question of what happens, quote, if Trump wins. In a new piece for that issue, Barton Gellman warns that if he makes it back to the White House, quote, we know what Trump would like to do with that power because he said so out loud. He is driven by self-interest and revenge in that order. He wants to squelch the criminal charges now pending against him. He wants to redeploy federal prosecutors against his enemies, beginning with President Joe Biden. The important question is how much of that agenda he could actually carry out in a second term. And Bart Gellman, staffer at Atlantic, joins me now. The sort of top line point that you make, which we've talked about in the show, is that you can't forget the fact that the man is literally running for his freedom. And I think it's so easy for it to seem abstract because the man has escaped accountability for so long. He's 78 years old. But it's not like he could end up in prison. That's not an insane idea. Like, right. What prison would look like with the Secret Service and what, but like, that's a real thing that he's really scared about and is motivating more, I think, more than anything, the run and the desire for power.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think there are people who console themselves with the idea that maybe he'll already be convicted in one of the cases by the time the election comes around. And so they've got him. But that is not what's going to happen. Even if he does get convicted in the D.C. case, which is the only one that looks likely to run its course before the election, the case will be on appeal.
Yes.
When the time comes that it's inauguration day. If he wins, his Justice Department will move to withdraw the case on appeal. There's a legal maneuver called confession of error. And they go to the appeals court and say, never mind, we don't think he should have been convicted.
Withdrawn.
And I would be surprised if he doesn't also try to pardon himself. And the interesting thing about the pardon is there's a legitimate debate among constitutional scholars about whether a president can pardon himself. But like so many other things about Trump, it's sort of irrelevant because if he does pardon himself, there is nobody withstanding to go to court and challenge that pardon except maybe the Justice Department, his own Justice Department.
Well, this speaks to a sort of a thing I keep coming back to in this discussion. I was thinking as I was reading your piece, the Liz Cheney line about, he's not going to leave, is that, it depends what other people do. I mean, he doesn't have unilateral power, right? So when Liz Cheney says he's not going to leave if, he's elected again, I thought, no, the Secret Service is going to escort him from the building at noon on January 20th, 2029, because that's their constitutional duty. And you could say, well, Chris, you're being naive. But at some level, it's like, I guess I feel this battle within myself between warning of the graveness of the danger and not ceding the terrain of his power. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and we shouldn't exaggerate. There are things the president can do and there are things the president can't do. And we don't know to what extent the guardrails will be holding. There is a career civil service. He wants to politicize it. There are courts. And he
wants to steamroll them all.
Right. There's Senate confirmation. But for example, it's not clear to me that even a Republican Senate would confirm Jeffrey Clark as Attorney General.
Correct. Yes, not clear to me either.
They might not. But what Trump's people are doing is very clever. He can put in under the Vacancies Reform Act.
Yep.
He could put someone as Attorney General for most of a year.
Acting, yep.
As an acting, as long as they're in any Senate-confirmed position around the U.S. government. So, of course, if he comes into power in January 2025, the people already serving in confirmed roles will be Biden appointees. But there's more than 100 positions that are Senate-confirmed and that are held by Republicans right now under Biden because there are all these like National Labor Relations Board.
Statutory bipartisan boards and positions.
Right. They must be party balanced. And the Trump people are looking at those names and trying to figure out, what MAGAs they've got to work with. And then after 90 days, he could appoint anybody he likes, Mike Davis, Kash Patel, as a counselor or a section chief in the Justice Department, as long as they're a GS-15 or higher in DOJ, he can then make them acting attorney general. And he could do that with all the other confirmed positions.
And we've got to say they were very, very aggressive with the Vacancy Reform Act, which is the law that governs a lot of this stuff. Obviously, there's constitutional requirements for advising consent of the Senate. There's a huge sprawling government, the Vacancy Reform Act, which is a pretty loophole-ridden piece of legislation. Yeah. They were very aggressive on it before. But I guess my point, too, is all the thing you're describing, like in the end, what I see in the future is a very immediate constitutional crisis if he's reelected.
Yeah, well,
or people roll over. It's one or the two. But I think the former is as likely as the latter, which is not like, oh, great, we're just going to have a big constitutional crisis. It's just to say that, like, he's going to go very hard and be very aggressive, and there are going to be some obstacles in his way.
No, well, the threat is authoritarian government. Yeah. The threat is lawless government.
Lawless.
And people are going to have to stand up to that. People are going to have to resist. And I think a Trump presidency would for sure have more than one constitutional crisis. You talk to legal experts, and they're all full of thoughts about loopholes he could exploit or residual powers or things that are profoundly against the norm, but that a president could do
right.
If he wanted to go completely off the deep end. But what they don't think about is stuff that's just flat out unlawful. I mean, there's the legend that President Jackson once said that Justice Marshall has
made his
decision. Now let him enforce it.
Yeah.
Apparently, he didn't really say that, but he kind of meant that. And it's not clear to me who enforces a ruling by the Supreme Court if Trump says, "I'm not doing that." I mean, Trump has said that any law or regulation or article of the Constitution can be terminated in the right circumstances. The right circumstances in that case being his fictions about the election. He said he could terminate it, and it's not clear who could stop him.
Barton Gellman, that piece is in the special issue from The Atlantic. It's sobering reading. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.